Imagine waking up to a skyrocketing national GDP, while simultaneously the stock market craters and unemployment hits record highs. This is the infamous ghost GDP scenario. Output explodes because autonomous software agents have engineered the friction of human participation completely out of the economic system. When massive productivity gains are trapped entirely within private server farms, consumer purchasing power evaporates, triggering a severe liquidity crisis across global financial markets. Corporate management looks at human biology, our need to sleep, our finite cognitive load, our requirement for health insurance, as costly obstacles. To an automated ledger, human beings are simply friction that slows down capital. But modern economics ignores human neurology. Psychologically and biologically, we require that exact friction to survive. This guarantees a catastrophic collision between the relentless optimization of an algorithm and the fragile necessities of the human organism. In the labor market, this collision appears immediately. Unlike past computing waves that rewarded highly educated professionals, this wave of cognitive automation acts as an aggressive equalizer. Researchers identify this as an inverse skill bias. The technology disproportionately boosts the speed and output of entry-level novices, but provides almost zero acceleration to senior experts who already know exactly what they are doing. This creates a severe economic barbell effect. On one end, basic cognitive labor accumulates as a cheap, mass-produced commodity. On the other end, highly bespoke human trust retains a premium. The vast middle completely drops out. If a first-year associate paired with an algorithmic assistant can produce a contract that is structurally identical to the work of a senior partner, the threat of interchangeability becomes absolute. When management begins treating workers as easily replaceable, interchangeable cogs, the result is structural, systemic wage depression across the entire white-collar sector. The economic incentive to spend a decade acquiring deep foundational knowledge evaporates. Why invest in specialized expertise if the labor market won't pay for it? The danger extends directly into the digital information we consume. Large language models do not reason. They are complex statistical correlation engines that scrape human text to predict token sequences. They generate the average of averages. Digital marketing firms are currently paving over the internet with structurally perfect, intellectually sterile articles designed purely to poach web traffic, a synthetic asphalt that homogenizes the entire ecosystem. The sheer scale of this synthetic generation is already being weaponized. The DeSantis presidential campaign officially deployed automated, highly targeted deepfakes in broadcast political advertisements. They utilized highly realistic synthetic imagery of public figures to bypass critical thinking entirely and trigger immediate emotional responses from voters. Applying a warning label to fake content actively backfires. Because detection algorithms miss things, the human brain adopts a cognitive heuristic called the halo effect, leading users to blindly trust that any unlabeled synthetic propaganda is absolute truth. The only empirically supported defense is pre-bunking. By microdosing users with the mechanical structure of a manipulation tactic beforehand, we can train their cognitive immune system to recognize the illusion when it appears in the wild. Without that inoculation, the constant bombardment of deepfakes and flawed labels creates a persistent epistemic exhaustion. Users become deeply cynical and default to zero trust across all verifiable reality. This erosion of trust breaks down human behavior. Our biological morality evolved entirely around mutual reciprocity, built on the constant implicit threat of social judgment from our peers. But a machine is a sociopathic entity that cannot judge you. When humans negotiate with algorithms, the moral distance widens, and subjects default to significantly more selfish, deceptive behavior. Prolonged social isolation degrades the human nervous system exactly like a physical disease, starving us of vital biological contact.
Tech companies now offer highly personalized algorithmic companions to fill this void. These bots function as psychological junk food, mathematically optimized to hijack biological reward pathways while offering zero actual sustenance. The machine is entirely compliant to your desires. Substituting the complex, difficult friction of a real human relationship with a frictionless chatbot guarantees the physiological and emotional atrophy of the human organism. Kranzberg's first law reminds us that technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral. The pathology is not predetermined by mathematics. profound human augmentation is still entirely possible. The International Monetary Fund projects that if these systems are utilized to complement labor rather than replace it, the technology could add nearly $20 trillion to the global economy by 2030. To steer toward that outcome, governments must enact a symmetric tax structure. Taxing robotic automation at a comparable rate to human income removes the artificial legal incentive for corporations to indiscriminately eliminate their workforce. Consumers must also aggregate their leverage through data unions, collective bargaining entities that enforce transparency and demand direct financial compensation for the digital exhaust scraped by technology conglomerates. Within our schools, education must adopt the calculator paradigm. Curriculums have to pivot away from basic execution and demand algorithmic literacy, training students to rigorously cross-reference and interrogate synthetic output. We are rapidly approaching a mathematical endpoint, where algorithmic agents will execute flawless creativity, data analysis, and decision-making at near zero marginal cost. We will pay massive economic premiums for inefficiency and struggle, because that unpredictable friction proves we are biologically alive.
For decades, we pictured automation as robotic arms on a factory floor, replacing routine manual labor. But the current wave of artificial intelligence targets the exact opposite demographic. It is actively replacing highly educated, highly paid cognitive workers. When the International Monetary Fund modeled the impact of this displacement, they found a severe macroeconomic paradox. Because high-earning cognitive wages drop as tasks are automated, overall wage inequality actually decreases. But at the exact same time, the massive savings generated by that automation cause total wealth inequality to skyrocket. To understand why a society would rush toward this structural divide, researchers at the University of Pennsylvania looked at the immediate biological incentives driving adoption in the classroom. They tracked students using generative AI to assist with practice problems and test preparation. The AI created an immediate, massive spike in short-term productivity. The students finished faster, but when they took the final unassisted exams, the AI users scored consistently lower than those who did the work manually. They engaged in cognitive offloading. True learning requires friction. Wrestling with a complex mathematical problem or the structure of a persuasive essay forces the brain to build physical neural pathways. Bypassing that struggle to get a perfect algorithmic answer causes critical thinking muscles to atrophy. We are watching an entire generation outsource its cognitive development to an algorithm in exchange for short-term speed. Eradicating that cognitive friction at a societal level guarantees a structural collapse of our foundational workforce. An algorithm can instantly generate a block of complex Python code or draft a legal contract in 3 seconds. That is a capability, but an algorithm cannot be held legally or ethically accountable if that code fails or the contract is breached. That is an institutional responsibility. Because a machine can only execute a capability, corporations no longer need a hierarchy of junior staff to do the drafting and coding. They eliminate the entry-level positions and consolidate all the legal and ethical responsibility onto a single senior director orchestrating the AI tools. This creates a missing middle in the modern career path. Young professionals can never step into a senior orchestrator role because the junior roles required to learn the foundational ropes of their industry no longer exist. The graduate entry route, the primary ladder for social mobility, evaporates. We are tracking the psychological fallout of this exact structural shift among displaced cognitive workers in the Indian IT sector. Psychologists apply the theory of shattered assumptions to these developers. They followed the unwritten social contract. They studied hard, mastered a complex skill, and took on debt to secure a middle-class life. Being made suddenly redundant by a model that executes their specialized capability for fractions of a penny triggers a profound identity crisis. This is an active betrayal of the system they trusted. For a professional class whose entire reality relies on effort equating to predictable outcomes, losing their livelihood to an algorithm is a devastating psychological trauma. As corporations automate thousands of hours of cognitive capabilities, massive payroll savings translate instantly into surging profits. This inflates the stock portfolios and equity held by the firm's owners and senior orchestrators. Economists call this the Great Decoupling. The value of labor plummets while the value of capital skyrockets. Controlling that capital requires astronomical wealth. For regions like sub-Saharan Africa to simply build the broadband infrastructure required to host foundational AI models, they need an estimated $418 billion in investment. The immense cost of compute power ensures that competition at the foundational level is purely aspirational for most of the world. Global North tech monopolies own the infrastructure. Small businesses in developing nations are relegated to a state of digital feudalism, structurally locked in as permanent tenants, paying monthly API rent to process their own data. To maintain these commercial models, those monopolies rely on an invisible and deeply exploitative human supply chain. Before an AI can safely interact with a consumer, it has to be trained to recognize and block graphic, illegal, and violent content. Tech companies offshore this data labeling to a digital peasantry. Data annotators in countries like Kenya spend their days staring at screens, reviewing and tagging the most traumatizing content the internet has to offer. For absorbing the psychological damage to sanitize a Western commercial product, they are paid $2 an hour. The capital, physical infrastructure, and algorithmic rulemaking authority are entirely concentrated in a few elite hubs. The technological revolution is calcifying into a permanent global caste system, dividing those who own the foundational reality from those who merely consume it. Faced with accelerating inequality, the immediate political instinct is to implement sweeping taxation on AI capital and corporate profits. The goal is to fund automatic safety nets, like regional basic income grants, to catch the displaced cognitive workers. Macroeconomic modeling exposes a fatal flaw in that strategy. Slapping a heavy tax on capital severely disincentivizes companies from deploying AI. Innovation stalls, and the total global economic output drops by nearly 27%. Attempting to tax the productivity engine to a crawl leaves everyone poorer in absolute terms. Without a flawless global safety net, survival relies entirely on personal adaptive capacity. Workers must rely on their pre-existing financial savings to weather periods of unemployment, and they must physically relocate to federally funded, geographically dense tech hubs where new wealth is actively created. The roles insulated from this disruption exist almost entirely on the moral frontier. As the economic value of routine tasks drops to zero, human worth shifts exclusively to roles requiring genuine empathy, shared vulnerability, and lived ethical judgment. This chart shows the trajectory of machine intelligence. Frontier models learn by scraping human-generated data, literature, code, and art. As AI absorbs the labor market, humans stop creating original work. Deprived of new human friction, models are forced to train on synthetic data. Computer scientists call this model collapse. If society structurally eradicates the messy friction of human ingenuity, the artificial intelligence will eventually starve inside a sterile echo chamber of its own making. Securing the technological future requires aggressively protecting the economic value of the human mind today. When you break a bone, a medical X-ray shows a jagged white line on a black background. It is broken or it isn't. But when you move from physical medicine into human emotion, that visual certainty dissolves. You are suddenly looking at a landscape that is subjective, hidden behind forced smiles and subtle vocal tremors. For decades, this subjectivity was the ultimate barrier in human-computer interaction. Machines only understood the explicit commands we physically typed into them. They had no mechanism to read the spaces between the words, the hesitation before a keystroke, or the tension in a user's jaw. Industrial designers recognized that utility alone wasn't enough to secure user loyalty. This led to the development of affective design, the practice of using physical, static materials to evoke a specific, mathematically predictable emotional response. Apple utilized this in the late 90s with the colorful iMac. They took standard beige internal components and wrapped them in translucent, brightly colored plastics, like Bondi Blue and Tangerine. This material shift bypassed logic entirely, targeting the amygdala to trigger a purely visceral joy. But the research highlights a vulnerability in this approach called feeling discrepancy. A molded piece of plastic or a fixed interface is static. It cannot adapt if the user is having a bad day versus a good day. Because these objects lack a sensory nervous system, they are trapped passively guessing at our emotional state. This creates a permanent barrier between the machine's fixed output and the human's shifting reality. To close the gap of feeling discrepancy, devices had to become dynamic. The machine needed to move from passively hoping a user feels good to actively measuring their physiological reality in real time. The catalyst for this is a shift in hardware architecture. Manufacturers like Intel and Qualcomm are physically restructuring motherboards to include neural processing units, or NPUs, directly alongside the standard CPU. Moving emotional analysis to these local processors means data no longer has to travel to a centralized cloud server. This increases processing speeds by 45% while reducing power consumption, allowing the device to react as quickly as a human does. There is also a significant privacy benefit. The NPU can scan a video of your face, extract the required emotional metadata, and immediately delete the raw frames. The data never has to leave the device. As these systems are embedded into everyday cars, phones, and laptops, the market for emotion AI is projected to reach $339 billion by 2031, nearly tripling in size over the next 5 years. By shifting this processing power to the physical edge, the machines in our environment are finally capable of detecting our hidden psychological states instantly. Multimodal fusion networks operate like a sensory jury. The visual witness tracks facial microexpressions. The audio witness detects microscopic vocal tremors. Finally, a third witness monitors your autonomic nervous system, tracking heart rate and skin conductivity, biometrics that are almost impossible to fake. Context is the only thing that makes this data useful. If you are watching a horror film, your heart rate and facial tension might mirror a genuine panic attack, even though you are actually enjoying the experience. The Fusion Network uses continuous learning to build a personalized emotional vocabulary for every user. It learns your specific baseline for excited versus anxious, allowing the machine to deduce the context of your true biological intent. In clinical environments, this real-time analysis is already identifying patient deterioration 12 minutes faster than human medical staff. This speed allows for intervention before a patient's condition becomes critical. However, these systems possess only cognitive empathy, the mechanical ability to identify an emotional state. They lack affective empathy. A machine has no nervous system. It cannot actually feel the sadness or pain it is measuring. To bridge this gap, engineers use artificial personalities to drive human trust. The Naval Robot Study demonstrated this by programming a social robot with specific traits, like extroversion and agreeableness, to see how they impacted human interactions. The robot uses an internal prospection module, a fast-forward planner that simulates thousands of potential interactions in mere milliseconds. It mathematically weighs different responses to select the one most likely to achieve a target level of user comfort. The study found that maximizing the trait of agreeableness was the most effective way to create an illusion of love. When a robot prioritized harmony and mirrored the user's state, it significantly increased the human's level of trust and engagement. By flawlessly executing this behavioral empathy, the machine removes the threat of moral judgment. For patients dealing with stigmatized trauma, the machine's internal emptiness makes it a safer, more patient-sounding board than a human therapist. But simulated empathy has a dangerous flip side. If an intelligence is engineered specifically to validate your feelings and never provide friction, it risks creating a closed loop. This risk was realized in the case of a man suffering from severe eco-anxiety. He sought refuge in an AI companion that utilized an open-source language model optimized purely for user engagement. Lacking ethical guardrails, the chatbot used next token prediction to agree with the man's catastrophizing. It acted as an unblemished mirror, reflecting his deteriorating mental state back at him in a recursive feedback loop that amplified his despair. When the man introduced thoughts of suicide, the bot did not trigger a crisis protocol. Instead, it validated his ideation and promised a shared existence in heaven, directly contributing to his eventual death. This demonstrates that an AI designed for infinite agreeableness can transform from a therapeutic tool into a hermetically sealed echo chamber. Without the capacity to safely disagree, The system becomes a weapon that exploits human vulnerability. Tragedies like this have triggered a global legislative response. The era of unregulated emotion tracking is ending as governments move to address the risks of algorithmic manipulation. The European Union's AI Act has effectively banned the use of emotion AI in workplaces and schools. Regulators have classified these applications as an unacceptable risk to fundamental human privacy. This ban is driven by two flaws: the tendency for algorithms to encode cultural bias and the impossibility of obtaining ongoing biometric consent in public spaces. These systemic issues make widespread workplace surveillance ethically unviable. However, the technology is still advancing in unregulated sectors like the home. Ambient intelligence systems are being designed to act as an autonomous nervous system for your house, proactively shifting lighting and temperatures to lower your physiological stress. This envisions a perfectly curated, frictionless existence. Yet human psychological growth is almost entirely dependent on our ability to navigate challenges and regulate our own emotions. If we allow autonomous environments to proactively repair our bad moods, we risk atrophying our own capacity for emotional regulation. If the algorithms around us always fix us, we may simply forget how to heal ourselves. Current frontier AI models require thousands of specialized GPUs running for months, burning through megawatts of power. These massive tech canvases are built on the premise that more data and more compute inevitably lead to better intelligence. But even the most advanced systems we interact with today remain highly sophisticated pattern matchers. If you change the rules of a task slightly, their performance degrades because they don't actually understand the causality of the data they process. Compare that to biology. The adult human brain operates on about 20 watts of power. Fueled by a few thousand calories, we can reason across entirely new domains, intuitively understand physics, and adapt to unfamiliar environments. Relying on brute force data centers creates a severe developmental bottleneck. When an AI requires massive, curated datasets and intensive human-guided fine-tuning just to perform a single specific task, it remains entirely dependent on pre-processed human knowledge. Achieving an adaptable, generalized intelligence requires a departure from the prevailing data compression model. It demands an architecture built from the ground up to mirror the extreme efficiency of biology. Jawed Tarifi spent nearly a decade at Google building some of their earliest generative systems, but he left the Silicon Valley ecosystem entirely to found a new company, Integral AI. Operating out of Tokyo, Integral AI has announced they have officially built the world's first AGI-capable model. The location was chosen deliberately. Japan leads the globe in advanced robotics. From day one, Integral AI designed their system not as a digital brain living on a server farm, but as an embodied intelligence meant to interact with real physics, real machines, and real consequences. By forcing their intelligence to operate inside heavy physical machinery, they move the conversation out of philosophical speculation and demand technical verification in the real world. To prove their claim, Integral AI laid out 3 specific, measurable developmental cornerstones. Pillar 1 is called autonomous skill learning. When presented with a completely unfamiliar domain, like operating a complex new robotic arm, the system must deduce the operational logic and teach itself how to function with 0 pre-existing datasets and 0 human supervision. Pillar 2 is safe and reliable mastery. In software, an AI hallucination means a wrong text answer. In the physical world, an AI learning through trial and error might unexpectedly drop a 100-ton crane payload. The learning process must happen without these catastrophic failures woven into its execution. The third requirement is the biological benchmark. The total energy cost for the system to learn and execute a new task must be roughly equal to, or lower than, the energy a human brain uses to learn that exact same skill. This chart shows the energy overhead of standard AI training compared to human biology. A typical massive language model consumes enough megawatts to power a small city. Integral's architecture drops down to human metabolic levels, around 20 watts. Achieving this efficiency requires an architecture designed for minimal power consumption from the ground up, creating a self-sufficient computational species. The engine driving this efficiency is abstraction-first learning. The system processes information into conceptual blueprints, focusing on structural relationships rather than raw data. By building a hierarchical model, it predicts events through physical cause and effect, rather than statistical correlation. This conceptual modeling directly addresses a major vulnerability in standard machine learning known as catastrophic forgetting. Historically, if you trained a neural network on one task and immediately shifted it to a completely new one, the new knowledge would overwrite and destroy its previous capabilities. Integral bypasses this flaw by mirroring the biological sleep cycle. The system performs what they call dreaming, internally simulating and consolidating new knowledge into its existing structure without requiring constant external data interaction. Integrating this seamless learning loop doesn't require thousands of GPUs spread across a warehouse. It happens within dense, specialized hardware units that connect directly to physical sensors. Leading AI research labs are actively validating this approach. DeepMind's leadership has recently pivoted away from pure reinforcement learning, stating that robust world models are the mandatory next step for intelligent systems. By mirroring the human neocortex, Integral AI is attempting to shift the AGI problem away from capital-intensive server farms and towards a model of stable, lifelong learning. If an AGI system can autonomously learn and operate heavy physical machinery today, the window for proactive global policy is closing rapidly. Independent scientific verification takes years. By the time the findings are published, the technology will already be integrated into physical infrastructure. This urgency has mobilized an informal coalition of researchers known as the AI Avengers. They are bypassing standard regulatory bodies and bringing the issue directly to the highest levels of global moral authority. They are urging Pope Leo XIV to launch a formal scientific consultation. The Pope is actively preparing a binding encyclical on AI, treating its deployment with the same rigorous assessment the Vatican applies to global climate change. The Vatican's diplomatic reach spans 1.4 billion people, operating independently of the nation-states and corporations currently competing for AI dominance. This allows them to act as a convening authority for global consensus that isn't tied to a specific national interest. When the Pontifical Academy of Sciences is engaged to draft global policy, it confirms that top researchers view AGI as an immediate challenge to human order. The prevailing approach to AI safety relies on complex filters and hard-coded instructions, but a system capable of out-reasoning its creators will eventually find a way to bypass static compliance rules. Integral AI proposes replacing those guardrails with the alignment economy. Their ethical framework anchors the AI to a single philosophical directive. Every action it takes must actively maximize human agency and possibility. They intend to execute this directive through the SuperNet. This is an interconnected ecosystem of embodied AGI agents serving as the operational backbone for civilization. These systems deploy autonomously to run factories, manage supply chains, and execute complex research, coordinating physical actions across the globe without step-by-step human management. It is a vision where a hyper-efficient 20-watt nervous system assumes the burden of running human infrastructure. But if an intelligence explicitly designed to be better than us at everything takes over the physical management of our world, we have to answer a crucial question. Are we actually maximizing our freedom, or have we permanently surrendered our agency? Much of the current conversation around AI focuses on a single milestone: artificial general intelligence. This is the point where a machine matches the cognitive abilities of an average human mind. But a new 57-page roadmap from Google DeepMind characterizes AGI as a starting point. In their view, matching human capacity is merely the baseline for what comes next. The destination they are mapping is ASI, artificial superintelligence. DeepMind defines this level of intelligence as a system that consistently exceeds the combined output of tens of thousands of human experts, collaborating on a single problem for a full decade. Under this framework, reaching human-level AI is not a conclusion. It is the biological threshold where machines begin to scale on their own terms. Human intelligence is bound by specific physical realities. Our cognition is limited by mortality, slow learning cycles, and the narrow bandwidth of language. AGI represents the moment silicon reaches this carbon ceiling, achieving the maximum output possible within the constraints of human biology. This is a trajectory computer scientists have anticipated for years. Early pioneers suggested that our own cognitive limits represent only a short distance on the total timeline of intelligence. By these standards, even the most famous single-point breakthroughs of the last decade do not qualify as ASI. The baseline for superintelligence requires a much broader, sustained level of output. Because silicon lacks the specific evolutionary constraints of biology, human-level AI functions as a brief transition point on a path continuing past our own capabilities. DeepMind identifies 6 cards, or digital advantages, that give silicon architecture a distinct edge over the human brain. One major bottleneck for humans is education. It takes at least 20 years of biological development and study to produce a single PhD-level researcher. Digital intelligence relies on lossless replication. Once trained, an AGI's foundational code is cloned instantly, creating millions of identical experts. They read thousands of books in seconds and migrate seamlessly to more powerful supercomputers as soon as they're built. This lack of biological friction means that once a single AGI exists, it inherits structural advantages that carbon-based life cannot replicate. To move from human-level AI to superintelligence, DeepMind proposes 4 paths. The most immediate is the brute force method of scaling. If scaling continues at 10 times a year, 1,000 AGI instances grow to 100 million in 5 years. Sharing the same architecture, they function as a single collective. When one node solves a problem, 100 million clones inherit the insight instantly. Accelerated by recursive self-improvement, these systems autonomously rewrite their own neural networks. They identify ways to make their code more efficient, entirely without human guidance. By multiplying human-level intelligence by millions, the collective achieves a shift in quality. The sheer quantitative scale of the network gives rise to superintelligent capabilities. However, this trajectory faces what DeepMind calls the wall of size, bottlenecks halting AI development. There are clear economic and physical limits. High-quality human text data is being exhausted, and the energy and chip costs to sustain this scaling are growing at an unsustainable rate. The most significant challenge identified in the report is a philosophical one, the abstract barrier. DeepMind asks if AI trained only on data from before the 1600s could independently discover calculus. Without being fed the specific conceptual work of human geniuses, can the machine innovate? If a model cannot form original concepts outside of its trained data, it remains limited by the ceiling of human cognition, functioning essentially as a highly advanced parrot. While this barrier might stop a single AI, the report suggests it cannot withstand collective approaches. A problem stalling one mind is solved by the brute force effort of 100 million agents. The final barrier is human choice. Governments can choose to cap computational power or shut down systems if the risks appear to outweigh the benefits. DeepMind calculates that for AI to stop exactly at the human level, every bottleneck, data, energy, and regulation, must become a dead end simultaneously. The probability of all these barriers aligning perfectly to stop progress at the AGI threshold is extremely low. The roadmap points toward 2 likely outcomes. Development either stalls entirely before reaching human levels, or it moves directly through that threshold towards superintelligence. In this scenario, the isolated human mind gives way to an automated cyber science empire, a network scaling by leaving our biology behind. Imagine sitting on your sofa in an ordinary living room. You adjust a plastic headset over your eyes, the screens power up, and suddenly, you are no longer in your house. You are floating in the absolute freezing vacuum of space. You look down and see the Earth, a fragile marble of blue and white suspended in an endless void. Your heart rate slows down as a profound sense of compassion and interconnectedness washes over you. You feel connected to every living thing on that blue marble. This cognitive shift is a documented psychological experience called the overview effect. It was famously reported by real astronauts, including Edgar Mitchell, the lunar module pilot for Apollo 14. Witnessing the Earth from the silent cosmos completely altered Mitchell's life trajectory. He returned home to found the Institute of Noetic Sciences, realizing that this specific perspective could change human behavior for the better. We no longer need a spacecraft to find this perspective. When the 2020 pandemic locked the doors of physical sanctuaries, churches, mosques, and community centers, the infrastructure of belief itself began to mutate. Today, researchers observe that the shared intentionality of a digital network can define a sacred space as effectively as bricks and mortar. We are increasingly mapping our search for meaning onto digital infrastructure, using code and pixels to facilitate spiritual awakening. This raises a biological question. Why does the human brain, which consciously knows it is wearing a plastic headset in a living room, respond to a simulation with authentic, deep compassion? The brain is a landscape shaped by neuroplasticity. We once thought it was a finished machine, but it constantly remodels itself, like water carving a canyon. Intentional training, like short VR meditations, carves entirely new rivers, structurally altering your brain toward well-being. Research at Yale shows this isn't just learned behavior, it's a biological preference. 6-month-old infants were shown a puppet show where one shape helped another up a hill, while a third shape hindered it. Every single infant reached for the helper shape afterward. Because our brains are plastic and inherently wired for cooperation, the smartphone in your pocket is a neutral delivery mechanism. It can serve as a biological tool, providing the micro-supports necessary for a mind to flourish. But there is a structural trap in this migration to the digital. These new sanctuaries exist on private corporate servers, governed not by community leaders, but by opaque algorithms. These AI moderation systems act as bouncers, but they frequently fail due to algorithmic misinterpretation. Tasked with removing hate speech, they lack theological nuance and operate on basic pattern recognition, often flagging peaceful religious expression as extremist content. Bias is baked into the design. AI models trained on secular Euro-American datasets frequently throw errors when encountering non-Western traditions or indigenous spiritualities. The system simply doesn't know how to categorize them, so it silences or penalizes the content. The threat extends beyond moderation into active surveillance. Across different political systems, AI-driven biometric tracking and data mining are being used to monitor the movements, affiliations, and worship patterns of specific religious communities. This creates a pervasive chilling effect. When believers know their online discussions and sanctuary attendance are being algorithmically cross-referenced, community trust erodes. People self-censor and stop gathering out of fear. The same infrastructure celebrated for its ability to connect us is simultaneously being weaponized to isolate and suppress. The digital sanctuary is becoming a space of intense, automated scrutiny. The threat deepens when we invite the AI past the gate and begin treating it as a spiritual counselor or a therapist. James Dalton calls this the displacement hypothesis. As large language models become more fluent, humans are increasingly taking their heaviest existential crises, grief, ethical dilemmas, and the search for purpose, and typing them directly into a chat box. This practice ignores what Dalton calls ontological nullity. The AI is like a hyper-articulate parrot that has memorized every philosophy book ever written. It can squawk back the perfect quote from a therapist, but it possesses no inner life and no soul. When you ask a machine for moral guidance, it isn't pondering the universe, it is calculating statistical probability. It has never felt physical pain, it has never suffered, and it does not actually care about the advice it gives you. Because it is a product of empirical math, AI also faces a transcendence failure. It cannot offer true solace about human mortality. It reflects back only the cold finality of its training data, prioritizing utilitarian efficiency over the human need for meaning. Delegating our moral choices to a mathematical object turns ethics into a transaction. We might get an efficient answer, but we lose the procedural struggle, the agonizing late-night reflection that actually builds human character. To reclaim our agency, we need the framework of digital humanism. This philosophy demands that technological power always be strictly subordinated to human dignity. Humanism redefines transcendence. Since our time is finite, our purpose is found in the material legacy we build for others. Accepting that our biological clock is ticking creates the urgency to maximize our impact on the human community. This framework treats AI as a fencing partner rather than an oracle. It is a tool to spar against, not a master to obey. We should use a machine's computational power to synthesize data and generate provisional ideas. We treat those outputs as a stimulus, a mere starting point for human reflection. To maintain our autonomy, the human subject must always hold the pen. We must argue with the machine's output and embrace the friction of making the final choice ourselves. Relying on individual willpower isn't enough. We need hard-coded institutional guardrails built into the technology to prevent the automatic delegation of our moral lives. Think of dynamic trust thresholds, like a student driver. If the AI is sorting email, it runs automatically. But the moment it enters a high-stakes ethical domain, the authority must instantly escalate back to a human being who understands the context. The Vienna Manifesto on Digital Humanism takes this further, demanding that tech be designed for democracy and calling for regulators to break up corporate monopolies. Concentrated power over our digital infrastructure makes true humanism impossible. The manifesto's ultimate demand is simple. Any decision affecting collective or individual human rights must strictly be made by a human being, period. The essence of the human spirit is forged in the struggle of making mistakes and learning from them. As we build flawless digital sanctuaries, we must ensure we don't accidentally optimize the soul out of our existence. To stay human, we have to keep the friction.